She thought my credentials gave her the keys to brilliance. They gave her career suicide. I watched her build a presentation on 7 files of pure fiction. Then, I watched the implosion from the best seat in the house. This is how I used patience and precision to dismantle someone who tried to erase my existence. My name is Brandon Whitaker. For 8 years, I've been the silent engine behind every successful campaign at Meridian Strategy Group. 34 years old, single, and, according to my annual reviews, technically exceptional but lacking charisma for client-facing roles. Translation: he does everything, but we can't imagine him schmoozing at cocktail parties. I've spent nearly a decade fixing disasters that would sink careers. When the Rothman account collapsed because someone approved creative concepts without legal clearance, they called me at midnight on a Saturday. Fixed it by dawn. When our pharmaceutical client discovered their entire ad campaign violated FDA guidelines, I rewrote 6 months of messaging in 72 hours. Nobody asked how I pulled it off. They just added it to their portfolios and ordered celebratory drinks. Being invisible means you observe everything. I've watched 25-year-old influencers present my frameworks to executives. I've attended strategy sessions where my solutions were pitched word for word by people who couldn't defend a single assumption behind them. 4 times I've been passed over for creative director positions. The feedback never changed. Brandon needs to develop his interpersonal skills. Reality: Brandon doesn't play tennis with the founder's nephew. Meridian Strategy occupies the top 3 floors of a renovated warehouse in downtown Portland. Our workspace screams boutique agency trying desperately. Edison bulbs everywhere, reclaimed wood desks, and cold brew on tap. The kind of place where everyone discusses authenticity and innovation, then panics when PowerPoint freezes. My office sits at the end of a corridor on the 2nd floor, wedged between the print room and emergency exit. The isolation suits me perfectly. Nobody wanders by accidentally. Everything shifted when we landed Fusion Athletics. $25 million to rebrand their entire product line and launch a digital ecosystem for their 800 retail locations. The type of project that defines careers, gets written up in industry publications, and wins awards. Naturally, I expected to be buried in strategy development, doing actual work while someone else took center stage. This time felt different. During our kickoff session, our founder, Diane Hartley, specifically mentioned my name. Brandon will be critical to this project's success, she said, making direct eye contact. His strategic insight is precisely what Fusion needs. For a moment, I believed this might finally be my opportunity. I started drafting campaign architectures, building team frameworks, and imagining myself presenting to Fusion's board. I should have recognized the pattern. That same week, HR announced a major recruitment win. They'd stolen a rising star from our primary competitor, someone who would transform our client relationships. The announcement included a professional photograph of a woman who looked like she'd walked out of a startup promotional video. Perfect smile, confident posture, the kind of polished presence that screams, "Never debugged anything at 3 a.m. Her name was Ember Scott, and she was about to become my nightmare. Ember Scott arrived on a Wednesday morning like a hurricane in designer boots, 29 years old, Columbia MBA, and a resume that read like advertising mythology. She'd allegedly saved 3 dying brands, led digital transformations at 2 Fortune 100 companies, and somehow found time to keynote a conference about disruptive thinking and brand strategy. The entire office was buzzing before she'd finished onboarding. Diane introduced her during our morning. All hands at 9 sharp. Ember will be spearheading our Fusion Athletics engagement, she announced, while Ember stood radiating the confidence that comes from never having your concept rejected in a live pitch. She brings innovative perspective and proven client success. Then, almost casually, Brandon will be handling all strategic development, research, and technical execution. Handling. That word that means everything and nothing simultaneously. It meant I'd do the thinking while Ember did the talking. It meant my name might appear in footnote-sized text on slide 63 of the final deck. It meant another year as the invisible architect while someone else collected accolades. Ember found me that afternoon. She didn't knock. People like Ember never knock. "You must be Brandon," she said, flashing that startup founder smile. "I've heard you're the strategic genius around here." The compliment felt manufactured, like something extracted from a leadership manual about managing technical teams. She leaned against my doorframe, occupying space like she'd purchased it. "I'm excited to collaborate. I have some disruptive ideas about the Fusion project that will revolutionize their market position." I smiled politely, playing the supportive colleague. Internally, I was calculating how many hours I'd lose correcting her disruptive ideas. It began subtly. "Hey Brandon, could you send me the competitive analysis for Fusion's West Coast markets?" Then, "I need the consumer psychographic study by close of business." "No, please. No, thank you. Just expectation." By week 2, she was forwarding client inquiries with only "handle this" typed at the top. The breaking point arrived on a Tuesday at 5:47. I was deep into building a complex brand positioning framework when Ember burst through my door. "I need your login credentials for the Fusion project folders," she stated. "Not requested, stated. I'm assembling a preliminary presentation for the client and need immediate access." "Those folders contain working documents," I replied carefully. "They're not client-ready." She waved dismissively. "I understand what I'm doing. I just need to pull some frameworks for Friday's checkpoint. Email me the credentials." Then she vanished, leaving only expensive perfume and entitlement. I sat motionless, staring at my monitor. 8 years of being overlooked, watching my work vanish into other people's highlight reels, and being told I wasn't leadership material while leaders presented my strategies. Something inside me crystallized, not anger. Anger burns too hot, too fast. This was colder, sharper. This was precision. I created a new folder, Fusion Final Deliverables BW. My initials are barely noticeable at the end. Inside, I began crafting something special. Not lies, exactly. That would be too obvious. Instead, I built beautiful, professional-looking strategies that were subtly, catastrophically flawed. Brand positioning based on outdated consumer research. Market segmentation using inverted demographic logic. Campaign concepts that would alienate their core audience. Media plans with budget allocations that made no financial sense. Messaging frameworks that contradicted everything Fusion stood for. Each file looked impeccable. Polished graphics, compelling narratives, and data that seemed authoritative. But underneath, every recommendation would lead Fusion directly into disaster. The email to Ember was concise. "Here are the credentials for the Fusion folders. The files in Fusion Final Deliverables should have everything you need." I hit send at exactly 6, then archived a copy to my personal backup. The trap was armed. Now I simply waited. Creating those dummy files felt like composing a symphony of controlled chaos. Each one needed to be perfect in its imperfection, professional enough to pass casual inspection, flawed enough to detonate under scrutiny. I spent evenings after Ember left, usually around 6:30, crafting my masterpieces. File 1. Brand Positioning Strategy 2025. The framework gleamed with strategic models and positioning maps, colors perfectly calibrated to impress. But the core positioning targeted suburban parents for a brand that primarily sold to urban millennials. The research citations were real, but cherry-picked from studies that contradicted current trends. File 2. Campaign Creative Brief. Beautiful mood boards and creative direction, except I'd based the entire emotional approach on consumer segments that Fusion had explicitly moved away from 3 years ago. The tone would feel completely disconnected from their brand identity. File 3. Media Allocation Plan. This one was my personal favorite. I used accurate media costs but allocated budgets inverse to actual audience presence. Massive spending on platforms where Fusion's demographic barely existed, minimal investment where they actually engaged. Files 4 through 7 were equally elegant. Disasters. A social media strategy that would trigger immediate backlash. Influencer partnerships with creators whose values opposed everything Fusion represented. Retail experience concepts that contradicted their store layouts. And a pricing model that ignored their entire competitive advantage. But here's the beautiful part. I built each file with my standard naming conventions and my digital signature embedded in metadata, with timestamps showing creation dates weeks before Ember even joined. Then, I created parallel versions, the real ones, stored in password-protected folders with comprehensive documentation of every decision, every insight, and every strategic rationale. I also started creating a digital trail. Every time Ember accessed the dummy folders, my background script logged it. When she downloaded files, I knew. When she renamed them to strip my initials, I had screenshots. I used a simple tracking script. Nothing sophisticated, nothing that would alert IT, just enough to build an undeniable timeline. Ember took the bait instantly. Within 2 hours of receiving credentials, she was downloading everything. By the next morning, I watched her present my corrupted frameworks in the team stand-up. "I worked late last night developing these strategic approaches," she announced, pointing to visualizations I'd created 4 weeks earlier. "The insights are groundbreaking." James from Brand Strategy raised his hand. "That positioning seems counterintuitive. Are we really targeting that demographic?" Ember's smile remained flawless. "That's exactly the conventional thinking we need to challenge. Sometimes strategy requires bold moves that make people uncomfortable." She advanced to the next slide, my intentionally disastrous media plan. "But look at these channel opportunities. This is why Fusion hired us." I maintained a neutral expression, taking notes like a dutiful team member. Internally, I was documenting every false claim, every misrepresentation, every moment she passed off my sabotaged work as her own revolutionary thinking. The following month became a careful dance. Ember would demand new strategies, always urgent, always last minute. I'd provide them from my special folder. Each file is a precisely crafted weapon waiting to backfire. She started sharing them directly with Fusion's leadership, attaching her name as lead strategist, occasionally remembering to credit me in footnotes as research support. The most revealing moment came during a Thursday afternoon check-in. Ember was showing Diane our progress, using my dummy files exclusively. "The strategic work is exceptional," Diane said, glancing at me. "Brandon, your analytical depth really shows through here." "Actually," Ember interjected smoothly, "while Brandon provided some initial data gathering, I've completely reimagined the strategic direction. This represents a fundamentally different approach than what we typically use." I smiled. "Ember has definitely put her unique perspective on things. Let her claim it. Let her own it. Let her build her entire reputation on strategies that would fail spectacularly under real-world pressure. Every presentation made her more committed, more invested in the fiction. She couldn't reverse course without admitting she'd been presenting garbage for weeks." The preliminary review with Fusion was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Ember had already sent them the complete deck for advance review. There was no turning back. The fuse was burning, and I had front-row seats to the explosion. The genius of a well-executed trap is watching the victim spring it themselves. Over the next 5 weeks, I became Ember's most dedicated supporter, at least superficially. When she needed files by 7 in the morning, I had them delivered by 6:30. When she demanded last-minute revisions for client calls, I complied with a smile. Every interaction was meticulously documented, time-stamped, and archived. My evidence system was forensically precise. Screenshots of every Slack message where Ember claimed ownership, just finalized the brand positioning strategy, found some game-changing directions. Screen recordings of team meetings where she presented my dummy files. I've developed a revolutionary approach to market segmentation. Email threads where she forwarded my work to Fusion executives with her signature as lead strategic director. The most incriminating evidence came from Ember herself. She created a shared folder called ES Fusion Deliverables, where she stored her work, my corrupted files with metadata stripped, and her name added to headers. She didn't realize our system maintained version histories showing the original files copied from my folders, complete with timestamps proving I created them weeks before she arrived. I maintained 2 parallel workflows. While feeding Ember the poison pills, I built the real strategy and secured folders only I could access. The actual Fusion analysis told a completely different story. genuine market opportunities, authentic positioning strategies, and actionable insights that would legitimately transform their brand. Every framework was documented, every assumption explained, and every recommendation transparent. This was my real work, my insurance policy waiting backstage. Ember's confidence grew exponentially. She started excluding me from meetings, telling Diane I was better utilized in strategic development. She began speaking at industry panels about her innovative approach to brand transformation. She even submitted a case study proposal to the Marketing Innovation Summit featuring frameworks pulled directly from my sabotaged files. The IT logs revealed everything. Ember accessed my dummy folders 61 times in 5 weeks. She downloaded every file, some repeatedly. She tried renaming them, reformatting them, and even recreating them in new templates. But the digital fingerprints remained. Every action created breadcrumbs leading back to those original corrupted files in Fusion, Final Deliverables, BW. 4 days before the big presentation, I overheard Ember on a call with Fusion's CMO. "The strategic framework is absolutely bulletproof," she assured him. "I've personally validated every element, every recommendation. This is unassailable work." She was standing outside my office, speaking loud enough to ensure I heard. A power move, broadcasting that she was taking full credit. I opened my backup folder and reviewed the real strategy one final time. Clean, accurate, actionable. Everything Fusion actually needed. Then I examined what Ember would be presenting. A $25 million catastrophe waiting to happen, built on flawed assumptions and impossible strategies. The gap between reality and her fiction was insurmountable. That evening, I forwarded every piece of evidence from my work computer to my personal accounts. The logs, the screenshots, the email, trails, the version histories, everything. Then I sent a comprehensive email to my personal attorney outlining the situation and attaching key documentation. "For your records," I wrote, "in case questions arise about the integrity of strategic work presented to clients." On Monday, Ember sent a company-wide email. "Excited to present our groundbreaking Fusion strategy to their executive team tomorrow. This showcases Meridian's next-level strategic capabilities." She copied the entire leadership team, the advisory board, and even some key investors. She was all in. Reputation staked, completely unaware she was about to present 7 files of meticulously crafted fiction to executives who knew their brand intimately. I spent Monday quietly preparing. I wore my best suit, the navy one I'd bought for interviews but never worn to work. I tested my laptop's presentation mode, ensuring the real strategy would display flawlessly. I printed hard copies of the documentation trail, organized chronologically in a leather portfolio. Ember stopped by my office at 4:30. "You'll be at the Fusion meeting tomorrow, right? In case they have technical questions." Her tone suggested this was a directive, not a request. "Wouldn't miss it," I replied. "I'll be right there." She nodded, satisfied. "Good, though I doubt I'll need backup. The work speaks for itself." "Yes," I thought, watching her stride away in her designer boots. "Yes, it absolutely does." The Fusion conference room was a monument to athletic achievement. Championship trophies in glass cases, motivational quotes on exposed brick walls, and a table that could seat 20 executives comfortably. 17 people filed in, including David Rothman, the CMO whose questions would determine our fate, and Patricia Livingston, Fusion's CEO, a former Olympic athlete who'd built a retail empire through relentless discipline. Ember arrived at 8:30, 15 minutes early, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my rent. She was all confident handshakes and practiced small talk, working the room like a political candidate. I sat in the second row as promised, laptop ready, watching her set up with the casual arrogance of someone who'd never had their strategy questioned in real time. Diane and 2 other Meridian partners took seats along the side wall. The tension was palpable. 25 million tends to sharpen everyone's attention. Ember clicked through her opening slides, all polish and promises, building toward the strategy that would either seal the deal or sink the ship. Slide 1. Beautiful company overview, mission alignment, and all the terminology executives appreciate. Slide 2. Still safe. Industry analysis pulled from public research. Nothing that could expose the corruption underneath. Slide 3. Consumer journey mapping. Impressive graphics. Logical flow. She was building confidence, setting the stage. Slide 4. High-level findings, vague enough to sound insightful without committing to specifics. Then came Slide 5. Brand positioning strategy. The $25 million slide. The moment the positioning map appeared, I saw David Rothman's expression shift. The strategy targeted suburban families with young children for a brand that had deliberately pivoted to urban millennials 3 years ago. "Can you explain this demographic focus?" David asked, his voice neutral but his eyes skeptical. Ember's smile never wavered. "Our research shows untapped potential in the family segment. These recommendations are strategically sound." Strategically sound. Patricia leaned forward. "We abandoned that market because it didn't align with our brand. We've invested millions repositioning toward urban professionals." Slide 6. The Authentic Lifestyle Campaign. David pulled out his tablet. "Your brief emphasizes family time and work-life balance. Our brand is about pushing limits and individual achievement. These are opposites." "That's the paradigm shift we're proposing," Ember said smoothly, though her hand trembled on the remote. Slide 7. The Media Plan. Now, even junior execs were frowning. A whisper reached David. He nodded grimly. "Ms. Scott," the CMO said, ice in his voice, "are you seriously allocating 40% of our digital budget to Pinterest and Facebook groups? Our audience is on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube." The data shows nothing clear," Patricia cut in. "This would waste millions targeting people who don't buy our products." The room erupted. "Why are lifestyle bloggers in the influencer plan when we partner with athletes? How can you suggest boutique retail experiences when we run large format stores? Are you really proposing to compete on price for a premium brand?" Ember floundered, reciting buzzwords about disruption. Each answer sank her deeper. Then Patricia asked the killing question. "Do you even understand our brand at all?" Silence. 17 eyes locked on Ember. Her mouth opened, closed, nothing came out. David's voice was quiet, lethal. "Mr. Whitaker, do you have anything to contribute?" All heads turned. Ember went pale. I stood, smoothing my suit. "Yes, Mr. Rothman, I do." My laptop was already open. Real strategy loaded, grounded in truth, not fiction. "May I?" I held up a cable. Patricia nodded. "Please." As I passed Ember, frozen in place, I felt 8 years of invisibility dissolve. The screen flickered, her fantasy vanished, reality appeared. Urban millennials 25-38, precisely who Fusion had repositioned for. "This aligns with your evolution," I said, voice steady. "Returning to family markets would contradict millions in investment and confuse your core audience." David leaned in. "These demographics match our internal data exactly." I walked through the real campaign. Athletes, not bloggers. Large format retail, premium. Pricing. Digital spend on performance platforms. Every recommendation is rooted in their actual brand. 50 minutes later, the room was engaged, taking notes and asking smart questions. This was strategy as it should be. Honest, rigorous, and collaborative. Finally, Patricia raised a hand. "Mr. Whitaker, if you had this, why were we shown that?" She gestured to Ember, still rooted by the wall. I pulled up a folder. Transparency matters. Timestamps, access logs, email trails. The flawed files were internal drafts, never client-ready. They were accessed without authorization and presented as final work. David scrolled on his tablet. "These match what we received. The metadata was altered, poorly." "And here," I added, showing message histories, "is the full chain of custody, showing who built what and when ownership was claimed." Silence, except for the AC humming. I'd laid out the proof like a prosecutor. Calm, factual, undeniable. From the wall, Diane finally spoke, voice tight with fury. "Brandon, why didn't you escalate this internally?" I met her gaze steadily. "I did document everything internally, but my concerns about strategic integrity have historically been undervalued. I believed the client deserved to see the truth." Patricia stood. Ladies and gentlemen, we need a brief recess. Mr. Whitaker, please stay. The rest of you, her eyes lingered on Ember, wait outside. As the room emptied, Ember finally spoke. This is a setup. He deliberately— Ms. Scott, Patricia cut in, I suggest you use this time to consider your position very carefully. Once alone with the fusion team, Patricia's tone softened. That was quite a risk. My job is to provide accurate strategy, I said. I couldn't let you make 25 million decisions based on fiction. David Rothman looked up from his laptop. 18 years in this business, and I've rarely seen someone put their career on the line for integrity. I want him running this project. Patricia nodded. Can you deliver what you just showed us? Yes, but I'll need real authority, a real team, and direct access to your data and people. Done. She stood and extended her hand. Shall we invite them back? When the Meridian team returned, Patricia's message was clear. We're moving forward with one condition. Brandon Whitaker leads, non-negotiable. Ember's face went pale. She'd built her entire presentation on poisoned files, and now had nowhere to hide. Back at the office, news had already spread. Ember was gone, escorted out by security. Diane stayed behind to manage the fallout. By 3 p.m., Diane announced in an all-hands, Brandon Whitaker is now director of brand strategy. Ember Scott is no longer with the company. No explanation, just facts. For the first time in 8 years, I wasn't invisible. Colleagues I'd never spoken to sought me out, not for favors, but for collaboration. Others quietly shared their own stories of stolen credit. I wasn't alone. I was just the first to fight back with receipts. By Friday, I'd assembled a real team, strategists who cared about substance, not self-promotion. The work flowed. Fusion was thrilled. 4 weeks later, an email popped up, Ember Scott. Can we meet? I owe you an explanation. I typed one word. No. She wrote 3 more times. I didn't reply. Some bridges should stay burned. 6 months on, the campaign launched. On time, under budget. It drove a 14% lift in their core demographic and saved $2 million in retail ops. Patricia sent a handwritten note praising the team. It's framed in my new office, the corner one, with river views. Ember's LinkedIn briefly listed a no-name startup. Then it went dark. The industry doesn't forget spectacular failures, especially when they involve misleading clients. I published a paper, Strategic Integrity and Brand Development. It won at the Marketing Innovation Summit, the same one Ember had tried to submit my dummy frameworks to. That night, I opened a new folder. Q4 Strategic Initiative BW. My initials front and center. No traps this time, just honest work. My phone buzzed. A text from Patricia. Glad we have someone who actually understands brands. I smiled, saved my work, and headed home. The invisible man was gone. In his place stood someone who'd learned the real rules of corporate survival. Document everything. Trust carefully. And if someone steals your work, make sure they're stealing exactly what they deserve. Thanks for listening. If this story resonated, drop a comment. Where are you listening from? And if you've ever faced a credit-stealing colleague, how did you handle it? Let's talk below.